Hello everyone, I am Uriah Heep, and this is my Literary Cafe. Welcome to the Great American Novel Series, brought to you by The Author's Matrix, where we do dramatic readings of popular novels. Our current novel is The Village Idiot by Dan Blanchfield. And in the last episode, we heard Chapter 1, which ended in a very tragic way. We met the Crumbly family, and little Annie Crumbly, the precocious 8-year-old, well, she passed away at the end of the chapter. So in this episode, we'll go on to Chapter 2. Now, Chapter 2 will take us back some 40 years before that tragic event we witnessed at the end of the last chapter. And we'll learn more about the good people of Crumbly, England. So, without any further ado, kick back, relax, enjoy the ambience of my literary cafe, get a cup of coffee, or in my case, a cup of hot chocolate. Sit back, enjoy the music, the snow falling outside, and on to Chapter 2. And I'll see you on the other side.
Chapter 2. Some 40 years before the heart-wrenching, piteous scene described in the Crumbly household that bitter spring day, a young graduate student, Addison Way, had caused quite a stir at the university. He had come from humble beginnings in the village of Crumbly. His parents had raised him and his siblings, who had died in childhood, in a small house high up the hillside that graced the surrounding countryside. As a young boy, Addison was intensely curious about the world around him and would spend endless hours traversing the highlands. At a very early age, he knew he would be a man of science. Upon arrival at the university, Addison wasted no time pouring his whole self into his studies. His analytic ability to decipher the most complex problems, reasoning cause and effect to find solutions, equally amazed and enthralled his professors. One professor described Addison's mind as working at a high poetic speed as it worked on the most complex scientific problems that seemed to confound even the most learned professors at the university. Addison had witnessed his 3 brothers and a sister waste away, similarly to how little Annie Crumbly would some 40 years into the future, and the effect on him was profound. He grew to doubt the experts of his day in their abilities to solve the most complex of human problems. Why would so many people, children especially, have to suffer and waste away generation after generation? Addison would ask himself repeatedly as he reached young adulthood. Addison reasoned that the most troubling aspect was that everyone agreed that this was normal. As far back as any recorded history revealed, the idea of the consumption of raw sewage water meeting the needs of humanity was what everyone did, and no one ever questioned it. The recollection of himself as a young boy gagged on raw sewage water daily troubled him as he grew older. As this was a mainstay of his and everyone else's diet from his earliest days, he sought not to question the efficacy of taking in raw sewage water, cooking, or bathing in it as he survived childhood. However, Addison was haunted by a troubling scene from his childhood. He remembered his uncle guzzling fresh sewer water just gathered from the trench outside his home one summer evening, and watching his beloved uncle die after hours of horrific vomiting. As a young, eager college student, Addison approached his professors with the idea that he shall study water. This was a monstrous idea, his professors concluded. No good would come from such a study, and on that point, they all agreed. "Water!" shouted Dean Gadling Bug directly at Addison as he sat across from this learned professor's massive oak desk crammed into a tiny office. Addison remained firm. "Why, Addison?" Dean Bug continued. "Why in the world would you want to dedicate your studies to such a feckless study as water?" The dean followed up his question with his tirade on the subject. He showed no desire to hear Addison's answer. "You'll be wasting that fine mind of yours, Addison," continued the dean, "on a subject that no one in academia has the slightest interest in. It is a dead subject. There is clearly nothing new to learn about water." Addison had lived high in the hills surrounding the village of Crumbly. Still, he had seen enough of the attitude to knowledge displayed by the dean sitting across from him in the people around him, and it was frightening to him. He saw at an early age, more than most, that the people closest to him shied away from any serious discussions around the family hearth. The latest gossip in the neighborhood was the most treasured topic for conversation when his family gathered. Addison's reverie was broken by the professor's continued rant. As Addison's mind drifted back in recollection of those days of his youth. "Indeed, Addison," Dean Bug continued unabated, "this prestigious university will not be made the object of scorn and derision by allowing one of its students to embark on such a useless and banal study. If the university concludes that there is nothing new to learn about water, then the matter is brought to a just and final end. We will not waste our valuable resources on such a fool's errand as you propose." Addison was stunned into silence by the vitriol coming from this respected dean. He slowly extricated himself from the Dean Bug's lair and, beyond his notice, slunk out of his office into the hallway. No further words were exchanged, and Addison returned home that evening wondering about his future. He would walk to the center of the village where the university sat to spend time observing the world around him. That world still looked beautiful to him as he made the trek home that day, and his determination to study the nature of water remained steadfast in his mind. "Father," Addison implored, "I wish to study the subject of water at the university and was soundly rejected by that monstrous Dean Bug. How could someone so seemingly learned be so closed-minded?" Addison's parents wished to have a conventional son after losing all their other children to waste and disease in their childhoods. Edmund Way and his dear wife Adela praised God when their last remaining child survived to adulthood. They wished Addison would take a trade, marry, and adorn them with lovely, healthy grandchildren one day. When Addison revealed his desire to study water at the university, Edmund and Adela were stunned and saddened. They felt they were yet again grieving for a lost child. "Son," Adela implored, "why would you waste your beautiful mind that God has given you on such a wasteful, foolish study? Do you know anyone who studies water of all things?" Edmund shook his head approvingly as his wife spoke gently to her child. "We have plenty of water, Addison," Mr. Way said, taking up Adela's cause. "Just take a walk outside to the trench across the street that is now, as I speak, overflowing with raw sewage water." Addison remained quiet. He had heard these arguments any time he brought up the subject in the past, and he had learned to keep his opinions to himself rather than upset others. While his interest in water was dismissed by his elders growing up, he persisted in what he felt was to become his life's work. "Father," Addison finally spoke up, "I have had a passion for seeing what is true about the world since I was a young boy roaming the woods behind our house. You have to remember this, do you not?" Edmund stared at the table beneath his elbows, firmly planted with his chin resting on the palms of his ruddy hands. "I feel a need, father and mother," Addison continued, knowing his argument's futility, yet persevered. "This passion will not die in me. It is the reason I was born." It was too much for Edmund and Adela Way. They knew their only beloved son was on the precipice of wasting his life. If they allowed Addison to pursue this reckless course of action, he would be labelled a lunatic or worse in the village of Crumbly and throughout the civilized world. Adela began to shake as a whimpering cry rose from her lips. The Ways had fought too long for this to be their legacy. "If you continue with this imprudent and witless exercise in futility, you will be forever known as Crumbly's village idiot, and I will not stand for it," shouted Edmund Way as he pounded the dining table. Adela's near-silent cry burst forth into a full-fledged wail. The following day, Addison made his way back to the university in the hopes of secretly accessing the chemistry lab. This time, he stopped by an open trench and scooped up a cup full of sewage water to bring with him. As he entered the university, he quietly walked across the open quad towards the science building, where he was to meet one of his professors, reaching the entrance in unison with Addison. "Professor Underhill," Addison meekly uttered, nearly under his breath. "Addison," the excellent professor replied. "What brings you to the science building at this time? Our class is not until tomorrow." Addison hesitated, as he did not plan on meeting anyone on his way into the lab. "I am doing some lab work, Professor." Professor Underhill glanced down at Addison's right hand and saw the cup of sewage water dripping putrid drops on the pavement below, as Addison's nervousness stirred the cup beyond his ability to still it, and cautioned, "The lab does not allow for eating or drinking, so be sure to drink your sewage water before entering." "Of course, Professor," Addison assured without making eye contact. Professor Underhill gratefully accepted Addison's offer to enter the building before him, brushed past his young protégé without giving him a second thought, and strode confidently into the science building with the authority of a learned professor. The professor's arrogance was palpable. He marched past Addison like royalty entitled. Addison followed slowly and waited for the professor to disappear around a distant corner before changing his pace to the chemistry lab, where he hoped to find none of his classmates present and working. The building was quiet, and Addison went to the lab unmolested. The giant double doors were already wide open. Addison believed he had a few hours to himself, but it became apparent that he did not. Although he was only a first-year student, he knew enough of science to swiftly arrange the necessary materials to begin an analysis of the sewage water sloshing around in his cup. In the nearly 15 minutes he allotted to form an abbreviated analysis, he had little time to prepare a petri dish and a few chemicals from the closet. As the clock drew his attention to the immediacy of the situation, Addison mixed the sewage water and chemicals in the petri dish, sealed it, and stuffed it in his side pocket. He heard the footsteps of students nearing the lab and made his way to the open doors. After leaving the lab, Addison felt something like a criminal that day, absconding with a petri dish that belonged not to him, but that was not the crime he felt overwhelming guilt about committing. He had taken to analyze a substance that everyone, from the most prestigious universities to the corporate titans, to heralded media of the day and the ensconced politicians, had never done and would never condone. He had taken raw sewage water to be studied and analyzed. If a judge and jury were present, he would have pleaded guilty as charged. As Addison reached his home and entered its front door, he was greeted by his father, who was still suffering from yesterday's discussion. There was no eye contact or greeting from either Addison or his father. Addison went to his room exhausted and fell to his bed, shaken by the day's events, and fell asleep. The following day, Addison awoke with a renewed vigor. He checked his coat pocket and found the petri dish he had absconded with still intact. The seal was not broken on the trek home yesterday, and Addison carefully hid the petri dish behind his books on the top shelf, where it would be safe from any unwanted discovery. As breakfast commenced in the Way household, tension remained in the air. No words were spoken for some time, as both Edmund and Adela secretly hoped their only beloved son had heeded their wise counsel and forevermore abandoned the lunacy that accompanied his plan to dedicate his life to the study of something as mundane as the water that flowed in the streets. "Aye, son." Edmund broke the silence that was becoming increasingly disturbing to all seated at the table. "Have you given some thought to our conversation of yesterday?" Addison dipped his spoon in the porridge before him, trying to scoop out the remnants of the sludge deposited by the sewer water used to prepare his meal without his parents' observation. "I have," Addison replied between mouthfuls. "I will pursue—" This beginning did not sit well with Edmund, who gently placed his spoon on the table. Addison stopped and waited for the full fury of his father's retort. "If ever I live long enough for my son to be hated and scorned for the rest of his natural life, may God in heaven take me now," was the retort Addison feared. There was not the fury that one might expect, but instead, it was a seething disappointment disguised as calm. It was the worst anger a parent can show their child. The bitter disappointment comes from knowing that you have wasted your life. Everyone will soon forget you, but not before the ridicule of those villagers who live in the village named after your ancestor will be heaped upon you until your final days. And this would be Addison's fate, and his father's. And this is what Edmund feared. Addison sat silently, never to complete his final sentence to his father. There was no conversation in the house on that topic again. Edmund did not attempt to speak to his son for an entire fortnight following that ill-fated breakfast. In the following 3 weeks, Addison completed his first scientific analysis of water while keeping the entire sordid affair secret from the university authorities. He had returned to the chemistry lab daily to refine and duplicate his study in various circumstances. After concluding the last phase of his experiment, Addison took his cryptic notes scattered about the lab table, stuffed them in his pocket, and secretly made his way to the exit. He felt almost invisible as he crept down the long, darkened hallway towards the double doors from whence he had entered an hour earlier. He could almost not contain his excitement as he marched home that late spring evening. "I may have the world's secrets in my pockets," Addison thought to himself. He tried to walk at his usual pace to give him the much-needed time to appreciate the world around him. Still, the tension associated with the results of his experiment, safely lodged in his pockets, forestalled his usual gait, and he found himself sprinting the last quarter mile up the hill to his house. Addison Way was home attending to her daily chores, but Addison's father had not yet arrived home from work, which was a welcome relief to Addison. He did not wish to be confronted by his father on this, of all days, perhaps the most significant of his young life. He was not disappointed and quietly marched to the back of the house into his sanctuary after a brief greeting from his mother. Swiftly, he tried to arrange his notes meaningfully to make sense of them. As he had to keep them hidden from his professors, classmates and parents, the pile of papers that lay before him demanded order. It took the better part of an hour for Addison to arrange his experiment's notes to that much desired meaningful order. He surveyed the results before him like a king overseeing his kingdom. As he began to analyze the results, he heard his father enter the house. The entrance was not good, and Addison could sense it. His father was angry, the cause of which was a mystery to Addison, but he recognized the pounding the floorboards took as his father lumbered into the house. There was no time to waste as Addison needed to return his experiment's notes to a safe place behind his bookshelf, lest his father discover them. After storing his notes safely, Addison lay on his bed, exhausted from the day's excitement. His notes would have to wait for calm to be restored in the house before it was safe to resume his examination. Addison lay awake in bed that evening well into the night. His eyes would drift up to the top shelf where he kept his most cherished books, behind which lay the beginnings of his life's work. And he stared. He felt ashamed that he had to keep his pursuit of knowledge hidden from everyone.
So, Chapter 2, we go back 40 years and meet Addison Way, a young college student whose desire to know seems to be quite a bit larger than those around him, his professors, his parents. And it seems that people don't like this so much about Addison. They'd rather he'd be like other people, just accept things as they are. Why would you question things? And yet, some 40 years in the future, we heard poor Annie pass away. Well, that was Chapter 2 of The Village Idiot. In the next episode, we will dive into Chapter 3. And until then, goodbye, good luck, and we'll see you next time on the Great American Novel Series. I'm Uriah Heep, and this is my Literary Cafe.